All right, well, welcome back. So how many of you, this is your first touch with Latin? Really? How many of you know a little? Okay. I'm going to be counting on you. That's how much I know. It's the reason why they gave Mark chapter 1, James 2 chapter 9, James 2 chapter 3 and 47. There's a reason why they gave you chapter 1. Yeah, but I think, well, here's my plan. I guess it's my plan. So here's the plan. We're gonna start at page 3 of the Henley Latin 1 book, and we're gonna move forward with the ideas in the order that they have them in that book, and we're gonna get how far we get. Even though 3 hours feels like a long time to me right now, if we just keep moving systematically through that book, I don't think we'll run out of things I know by the time it's time to go home. So that's my plan. And I've started this book with several classes. First 5 lessons I got. So, okay. So, it was mentioned earlier that Latin is systematic. And Latin is systematic, which is not the same thing as saying it's as systematic as math. Right? It is still a language. It's still human communication. So as you go through it, you can rest, you can be thankful for the system, and you've got to also be a little bit like, this isn't math. This is language. There's going to be curveballs thrown all over the place. But it is far more systematic than English. Not that English is not systematic, but Latin is structured in such a way that it makes it easy to teach it. It is its own system. So when you want to teach it to someone else, the teacher already has the system to follow. So much of English is contextual as to how it works, right? Even how syntax works, how a sentence structure and sentences are formulated. I can't imagine teaching English as a second language. I laud glory, laud, and honor to those who undertake that task. But there is a system to Latin that especially makes it easy to get started, because there's some bedrock foundations that don't change. And then you do get to those curveballs. I remember a student one time, we got to a certain verb form that's linked to an adjective form. And I'm not going to even try to explain it because I don't think I could. But a certain part of this verb behaves like an adjective, and there's this crossover. And a particular ending that we had learned as a noun, as a verb ending, became an adjective ending. And my student slammed her hand on the table. I've been lied to! You said it was a verb ending! I know! I didn't know this was coming to you! Out of nowhere! But no, just as a caveat, general warning, this is human communication. And so we have ways that we communicate, whether they go by the rules or not. And because it's human communication, eventually the oddities become the rule. Right? This is how language works and develops. It used to be against the law, but the law was pretty conventional. Like some of the examples in English, we're not supposed to end the sentence with preposition. Right? It's kind of a conventional rule. If you do it in everyday chit-chat, you're probably not going to get corrected. Like, so who'd you go to the movie with? We just say that all the time. We don't worry about it. If you're writing an academic paper, we're still kind of in a place academically where you wouldn't do that unless it was your character saying it in a story. But that all flows out of Latin and an esteem for Latin that we don't want to leave the Latin behind, and you can't end a Latin sentence with a preposition. It's impossible. It's incoherent. We can say, who did you go to the movies with, and it makes sense. You can't put the Latin words in that order, and it makes sense. It won't communicate. So holding on to the Latin rule for the sake of our English ivory tower, this stuff changes. And if we lose that, and all of a sudden now sentences are acceptable to end with prepositions, we haven't really lost anything. I don't think. People would disagree. I don't think we've lost anything in the sense of English communication. Another good one from the Latin to the English is the split infinitive, where technically you're not supposed to put an adverb in between an infinitive. To clearly elaborate that, To clearly elaborate, I just split my infinitive, right? To run, to dance, to jog, to talk, to elaborate. Those are all infinitive forms of our verbs. You're not supposed to split them by putting an adverb in the middle. You're not supposed to clearly elaborate. You're supposed to elaborate clearly. So you don't split your infinitive. Like, why is that a rule? It's because in Latin, you cannot split an infinitive. It's a single word. To clearly elaborate would be like take part of a word, throw in an adverb, and then put in the other part of the word. It doesn't happen in Latin because an infinitive is a single word. So if we adopt that from the Latin, we're adopting a rule that doesn't apply to our language because our infinitives are two words. So to split it doesn't do an injustice. It doesn't make it incoherent. So once again, we're able to communicate with split infinitives. If I'm turning in an essay to my tutor, I still don't split infinitives. But once again, languages shift and change, is all I'm saying, in a really long way around to say that. Okay, so Latin is systematic, but it's still a human language, so it's going to have some flux, some variation, and some places where you felt like you were lied to when the system falls apart. But it is very systematic, and so it does facilitate teaching it. So we'll just start with that for the intro. And I've got some English on the board. Isn't that cool? Yes, sir?
I didn't get one of these.
Yeah, you can have it. No, I need some. Does anybody else need a vocabulary sheet? We're probably going to use about 3 words off of it. You're welcome. All right, so cool thing is that there is some overlap between Latin and English. And there's a lot of overlap if you go to vocabulary words. It's hard to nail down the statistic because statistics are what they are. But the general feel for it is that over 50% of our 2-syllable words have Latin roots. And then over 75% of our 3-syllable words have Latin roots. So just our vocabulary, our English words often flow from the Latin, but not directly. It's all through the French. Remember William the Conqueror? When he brought the Norman invasion, he brought Latin with him. It was just all encapsulated in his French, which wasn't even modern French. But anyway, nonetheless, we inherited all these Latin roots via the French into England about the time that William the Conqueror made his way over there. And so so a whole lot of vocabulary, but not a whole lot of syntax. Syntax is a fancy word for the order of the words in the sentence. The word order in the sentence. And in English, word order helps convey meaning. Meaning is carried along by the order of the words. If we start swapping words around, we change what we mean. That's still important in Latin, but not as important as it is in English because the words carry more meaning within the word. The job that they have in the sentence is also conveyed by the way the word is spelled. And we'll get into that more in a minute. Their job in the sentence is contained in the way the word is spelled. So if you move that whole word somewhere else, does the job move with it? Yeah, it does. It still doesn't mean you put words wherever you want. But it means that more meaning is contained in a single word. So Latin is called an inflected language. English is not. Greek is. And what this means is that the language itself is structured in parts that are distinguishable within a word. We have a sense of declension, which I'm going to get into in a minute, but Latin is an inflected language, and so is Greek, so that different parts of the word convey different units of meaning. And so you can separate them and find the meaning of that little part. Like, we're going to get into these nouns, and when you get to an ending, meaning will be conveyed in 2 vowels because they come at the ending of any noun. That's kind of odd. The vowels in English don't convey meaning, right? The word conveys meaning. The vowels at the end in and of themselves don't. But what about the S at the end of an English word? Does that convey meaning? It does, right? So we still have a sense of the difference between dog and dogs. The meaning is the difference between one and more than one. or an apostrophe S carries meaning, right? Even if we don't have a word to go with it, if you were to see that on the board and know what the line is, because I left out a word, what does that convey in English? Ownership or possession, right? So a single letter with a little swish above it conveys meaning because it conveys possession. So that's one of our aspects of English that's similar. A single letter, or depending on the two letters, and that conveys meaning. That conveys either singularity or plurality, if you know the word, you know. And then you've got where it doesn't, because you have glass, which conveys meaning. Then you have glasses, which is a whole different meaning. So it's not necessarily contained in the letters, but oftentimes it is. All right, but Latin and Greek are both big time inflected, which means that the nouns and the adjectives, we're just going to do nouns today, are what are called declined. Which is when you look at a noun and you say, no thank you. I'm so glad you're word people. Because if I am not in a room with word people, nobody lasts ever. Those are the only jokes I have. So the nouns are declined. And so when you group nouns together into families, they're called declensions. And so we're going to get into declensions in a minute, but I want to show you first some more English words that are declined. Where different parts of the word, different groupings of letters within the word convey different meanings. So we're going to look over here at our Roman soldier. He has two arms. He's supposed to be holding his sword like this. But he looks like he was wounded severely in battle. Or he's in the middle of an appendectomy. I don't know. That looks odd. But anyway, he's supposed to be holding a sword. And so this is a Roman soldier. He is stationed in Gaul, which you're going to hear a lot about Gaul in Latin. His commander-in-chief is Caesar. Caesar once praised him for his bravery. And so in English, we have the Roman soldier. The Roman soldier is never a noun again, right? What part of speech are we using for the Roman soldier? Pronouns, right? So we're replacing Roman soldier, or whatever his name is, Bob the Roman soldier, with a pronoun. And in this sentence we say, he is stationed in Gaul. His commander-in-chief is Caesar. Caesar once praised him for his bravery. We do it again right there. So we use four pronouns. Instead of saying the Roman soldier is stationed in Gaul. The Roman soldier's commander-in-chief is Caesar. Caesar once praised the Roman soldier for the Roman soldier's bravery. We've replaced it with our pronouns. So how is it that you know that that is referring to the Roman soldier? I mean, what if it said a Roman soldier and it had that picture and it said she is stationed in Gaul? Well, that might have at least made us do a double take. Like maybe Mark's picture doesn't go with this story. Or maybe she's a very strong woman. I don't know. But it doesn't, right? There's something about English pronouns, especially, where that letter conveys masculine pronoun, right? That letter says to us in those sentences masculine pronoun. Because it's in all of them, right? Let me just look for the pattern. In this one, we're just looking for the pattern. He, his, him, his. H tells me we're talking about that guy. What job is he doing in this sentence? It's the subject, right? What job is his doing in that sentence? What's that? Possessive? Right, it is functioning as an adjective. But it is a pronoun, behaving itself like an adjective. Possessive. Subject? It's not the subject of this sentence, right? What's the subject of this sentence? His commander-in-chief. His commander-in-chief. So there's our subject, which isn't as important. But it is the subject. He is not always the subject, is it? He is not the subject of every English sentence. Caesar once praised him. What job is him doing? It's what? Direct object, yeah. How did you know to give it that name? What's it doing in the sentence that you would name it that? There you go, yeah, good. So the direct object is receiving the action. So what's the subject of this sentence? Caesar's the subject. What's the verb? Praised. Verb, right? So Caesar is acting, Caesar praised. Who or what did Caesar praise? Caesar praised him. So he received the action. So him, our pronoun referring back to Bob, is a direct object. For his bravery, what job are we doing there? We're back to our possession. That's right. Which is handy because it's spelled the same way as that one. So now we have an English letter that has meaning in these sentences. That letter has meaning because that says the guy that we're talking about. And now we have these endings. We have an E, we have an is, and we have an M, and then we have an is again, but we won't listen again. So we have an E, an is, and an M that are conveying meaning to us. That letter E is saying what up here? It's saying subject, yeah. And what is the is communicating to us? Communicating possessive. And what is the em? It's the direct object, and in English, I think they say it's our objective case. Do we use the word nominative for subjects? It's a nominative case, isn't it? Yeah. All right, so there's a new word that I just threw into the mix, and that's the word case, which is a reference to these endings and what they're doing in the sentence. You can't read my writing. That's supposed to say nominative, possessive, and objective. The E is nominative, the is possessive, the em is objective. In such a way that if we change that and we say he, commander-in-chief, is Caesar, we've lost meaning. Right? We have lost meaning. The sentence loses coherence. And him is stationed in God. We might still get the idea because of the picture in our conversation about it, but it's lost the meaning of subject because him doesn't work that way. He is stationed in God. His, I gotta fix that, lest we have nightmares. His commander-in-chief is Caesar. All right, so this is one example, and there's not that many. This is one example in the English language where we have a pronoun that is declined. It's where there's a stem. The stem is H. The stem conveys the meaning of that word. And then the ending conveys how it's being used in the sentence. And we have to line up he. When it's being used as a subject, we have to use it as nominative, or it just doesn't make sense in English. So we decline it. We decline the plural. All right, so this is third person, right? You know your people in language studies, first person is the speaker, second person is the one being spoken to, and third person would be the one being spoken about. So I am speaking, first person. You are listening, second person. He is falling asleep. I'm just kidding. Right now, he's the one being spoken about. I'm telling you about him. Is he talking? No. No, not first person. Am I talking to him? No. I said he is falling asleep. I was telling you about him. Right? So third person, I'm telling you about. There's only three people. There's no fourth person. There's no fourth dimension. There's three people. But we also have two numbers, right? We've already talked about singular and plural. So we've got singular and we've got plural, and we got first, second, and third person. I, you, and what goes here? He, she, it. And what goes here? We, you, or y'all. Okay. That's one thing that the South has got. Like we actually have a good form of that word. Y'all. We get the plural second person. Okay, so he, she, it. He is declined, as we just saw over here. Is she declined? What's our nominative for she? She. What's our nominative? What's our possessive for she? Her. And what's our adjective for her? Her. That's right. So doesn't quite have the flow that he, his, him had for us, does it? All right, so you think, well, maybe the pronouns are all declined. That would be cool. That'd be something I could sink my teeth into, but they're not. It's English. We're a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of stuff put together. So we get some declension and we get some not declension. But we get one more. We get they. What's the nominative of they? They. What's the possessive of they? Their. Yep, or their or theirs. And then what's the objective of they? Them. So there we've got our stem again. TH. The TH is conveying to us third person plural pronoun. That TH says that to us. We may not feel it because we think about the word all at once. Right, we don't think about the words in parts, and neither did the Latins, which is funny. Right, we're using this system to learn it. They didn't break their words up as they went to find meaning. We do that, but we don't break our they, theirs, and thems up to find meaning, do we? We just say them. We don't stop and think, third person plural was conveyed to me in TH. Because of the M, I know that it's the objective. Therefore, it must be receiving the action of the subject. No, we'd go mad. But that's what's happening when we stop to take a whole thing and we split it into its parts. Which is what we're going to do over and over and over again in Latin. In order to learn Latin, we're going to start from the parts and work toward the whole. Whereas when you learn a language, you learn it as a whole. Right? It's alive. In a sense, we're going to kind of dissect this living thing. Kind of kill it, spread it out on the table, figure out the parts, see how it works. Whereas if you were learning Latin from your mama and your daddy, it would come to you alive, like the way we learn English from our families. Okay, so all that is to say, we do have some declension going on in English. We have that S apostrophe S-E-S, or the S-E-S going on. And that goes on all the time, right? That's how we make nouns singular or plural. Adding an S or removing the S or the ES. And then we have the apostrophe S or the S apostrophe. That's about the extent of English declension. That's the extent where single letters within a word convey meaning. Now we just have D-O-G. We need the D, the O, and the G to get the dog. And it doesn't get declined. If dog is a subject, the dog wagged his tail. If it's the object, I threw a stick at the dog. No, that's a prepositional phrase there. I kicked the dog. Well, that's rude, I know. I hugged the dog. I hugged the dog. I don't hug my dog. Or the dog's food, right? So there's our apostrophe S. There's our possessive case for dog. The dog's food dish was full. But dog in and of itself, there's no meaning changed. If you change one of the letters, you lose the word. Dod, do, dog, dead. You change several letters. But anyway, that's the case. But in Latin, and where we're headed, very slow pace, is to the meanings of these parts. And we're going to look at the parts of the word because meaning is contained in the parts, not just in the whole thing put together. Bob, thanks for your help. We got to move on. All right, so if you have your book with you, and if you're going to be leading your students through this at home, and if they're not with you today, that is page 3 of your Henley Latin book. Page 3 and 4 and 5 are looking at English words that are declined. The ones we just looked at. That's what I mean by walking you through this book. It's all completely ripped off from Henley. Completely ripped off. And so if you have your Henley book and you're flipping through with us, we just finished page 5 and we're going to move to page 6, which is lesson 1, which is called the First Declension. And it says to open your grammar to number 31. Do you have a blue book with you? I mean, you guys, if you don't, it's okay. I'm going to put it on the board. Do not leave. But if you have this with you and you open it to page 5, you get to grammar number 31. Which is something to know about Henley. He doesn't refer to his grammar book by what page things are on. He refers to it by which point it is on the page, and he numbers his points. So this page has 31, 32, and 33 on it. So you'll get used to when he says grammar 31, you won't go looking at page 31, even though you tend to do that at the beginning. But in this blue book, This is your grammar. This has all your rules in it. And the purple one is your textbook. It's got all the exercises and all the instructions. But instead of attaching all of these pages to every single one of his textbooks, he pulled out all the rules and put them all together in one book, which is not uncommon for learning another language. They'll have the grammar, which is all the technical things that don't change even if you change textbooks. It keeps your textbooks from being so big. It puts it all together. So he said, open your grammar to number 31, and he gives you the first declension. You hear the first declension, and you begin to wonder how many are there. And there's only 5. There's just 5. And a declension, it seems like the best replacement word for it. It doesn't really mean declension, but it gives the same idea. And that's family. It's a family. All the nouns in the first declension have the same last name. Like everybody in your family, generally speaking. It has the same last name. And so, or we could just say that families are denoted by last names. And so the first declension, all the nouns in it have the same last name. We'll look at what the cases are, but if it's a particular number, like singular or plural, and it's a particular case, it's got the same last name. And that's how they all get grouped into families. And there's only 5 families in Latin. So we can think about them like families. And here's how we sort it. Here's the way I sort it, which isn't exactly like it is on this page, but somehow you need a spreadsheet to do this. So here's our spreadsheet. Our case is over here, and then singular and plural. And remember I just showed you nominative, possessive, and objective in English. We have those 3 cases. Latin has 6 cases. Oh, I don't need to abbreviate because y'all don't know what these words mean. Nominative. Who can give me the cases? Nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. Nice. And there's one more, but we don't study it. Vocative, or in the Latin it would be vocative. But it's an English word, so we say vocative. But we don't use it because it doesn't get used in what we're reading. It's a noun, it's for direct address. Like Seth, or child, get out of that chair. Man, come over here. It's all direct address stuff and it gets its own ending. But when you're reading prose, you don't get that. You don't get the author telling you, reader. So you don't get that. So we don't do it here. It's there, but it doesn't play into anything that we read. So just simplifying for the sake of what we're doing. But these other 5 do. So nominative, subject, genitive, possessive, dative, indirect object. Accusative, direct object. Ablative, object of the preposition. So right out of the box, we've got some that we recognize. There is no possessive. I'm like, wait a minute, one of the English ones isn't even there, except that it is. It just has a different name. So genitive is our possessive form. Dative, indirect object. How does dative happen in English? I gave the ball to her, or I gave her the ball. Even with just her, it's applying to her. I gave the ball to her. Right? What did you give? The ball. To whom did you give it? To her. So we use a preposition. We use that handy-dandy to, and we create a prepositional phrase that ends up being our dative, or our indirect object. But in Latin, it gets its own ending. And the ending tells you that it's serving the function of indirect object. And then accusative is our objective, our direct object. And then ablative is the object of the preposition. This is kind of a loosey-goosey one, because it's the object for some prepositions, but not all of them. So already, right out of the box, we're getting into the messy stuff. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to decline, we're going to be families of 30 more. We're going to decline the Latin word terra, which is only one word, but you put it up there twice, and I'll explain in a minute. So we're going to decline that noun. And it goes like this. Does anybody remember their first declension ending song?
Singular first declension. Plural first declension.
See, you already know some of this stuff. So, you learned, so what do you call it? Singular, first declensions. You learned the endings. Those are the endings to the Latin nouns that are in the family of the first declension. And just like the pronouns in English that we went over, the H was the stem for the masculine pronoun. T-E-R-R is the stem for the Latin word that we would translate earth or land. And so it carries all the way through, because if we want to convey the meaning of earth or land, it has to have T-E-R-R in it. If it has something besides those, it'll mean something else. T-E-R-R in Latin is the stem for the English word earth or land. And then as y'all just so wonderfully sang through the endings, the latter part of that word, the ending, will tell you what that noun's job is in the sentence. So if you see T-E-R-R-A-M in a sentence, it's really handy, because that's the only one that ends with A-M. You are dealing with the direct object. The word earth, land is being used as a direct object in the sentence. It is receiving the action of whatever the verb is doing. Some of them are pretty clear, but you may already be noticing some other fuzziness. Like, what do we do with that? I thought this was supposed to be helpful. And now we have three endings telling us apparently the same information. Well, this is where it is a system and where it is a language. And so context is going to be important. Syntax is going to be important, the order that the words are in the sentence. You're not leaving syntax behind, but it's narrowing it down anyway, right? If it's got a AE on the end, it's going to be only doing one of three jobs, given whatever number it is. It's either going to be possessive, the earths or of the earth, dative, to or for the earth, or your plural singular nominative. It may be the subject of the sentence, lands or earths. Earths, you can see earths. It's not the planet Earth, it's earth like, I have earth in my hand. Or if you think about the way, the part that's not underwater, the part that's not under the oceans, right, is the earth, the dirt. And that's why it also means land, because you can see how that would overlap. So there's another word for world, kind of the globe. There's a whole different word for that. For here, the earth is dirt. The stuff that's not underwater on the earth. Okay, so our book told us to look at that chart. We've looked at that chart, but we haven't finished it. So in our chart, we also get the meaning of the word. And we get land or the land. Or a land. Sorry, a could also go with it. So in Latin, there are no articles. There are no words to convey that meaning. No a, and, or the. So therefore, when you're translating into English, since you're going to English, it just needs to make sense in English. So if it needs a particular article, then you put it in there because you're translating to English. But there's no Latin to clue you into which one it's supposed to get. Whether it's a definite, right? That's a definite and an indefinite pronoun. I mean, an article. That's important in English, but that's one of those things you're going to do textually in Latin as you translate it. It'll either get the land or a land. Genitive gets translated, and I like this one, of the land or of a land. Just move my line. It's interesting to look at it that way because that's our possessive, right? That's the one we said was possessive, which we were dealing with apostrophe S's. And we could say, the land's vegetation in English. But if you were to say the vegetation of the land, you're saying the same thing in English, aren't you? The boy's ball, or the ball of the boy, got hit out of the park. We're saying the same thing with the of the land. And so the typical Latin translation for it is not to use our English apostrophe S. And I've gotten used to it now in Latin to where if it's genitive, it means of the whatever. I don't mess around with the S's or apostrophe S's anymore. And that helps because word order works out that way in Latin, which we can get into later when we get into some sentences. But the possessive is of the land, which means the same thing in English. Dative, terrai, would be to or for the land. or, once again, it could be a land, 2 or 4 a land. The accusative term would just be the land, or a land. Because if you think about it in English, we don't have any difference in the way we would lead into the direct object as we would the subject, right? The ball got hit out of the park, or the boy hit the ball. There's no need for any prepositions or any endings or anything. Just so this is always translated just the same as that. And then ablative, they throw in here by, with, from the land. Not because those are the only 3 prepositions it goes with, though. Those are just some examples of the common ones. Ablative is a very, very active case in Latin. It's got all sorts of applications. But generally speaking, you can think about it as an object with a preposition, and it'll get you started. If that makes any sense at all. The nominative plural, you would just make it plural in English. Lands or the lands. The genitive would be of the lands for arum, terrarum. The dative would just become 2 or 4 of the lands. Accusative would be the lands. It wouldn't be a lands anymore, would it? You don't have a and then a plural word. That's interesting. Anyway, and then an ablative would be by, with, from the lands. So all you would do over here is make the English word plural. So that's your chart on page 5, grammar number 31. We just call them blue book and purple book. In the blue book. So there's what's going on with a declined noun. That's the essence of what's going on in Latin with the nouns. Is it has a stem that carries the meaning of the noun, and it has an ending that tells you, generally speaking, what the noun is doing in the sentence. So I want to look at a couple sentences now so you can see terram in action. Perfect. I should have asked.
Are there prepositions in Latin? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Would there be like a preposition in Latin and then the ablative form of the noun? And that's why you know it's by, with, from, or whatever else?
Yes, there are Latin prepositions. Yes. So that's not included in the meaning. Right. Good question. We were including all sorts of things in the letters, weren't we? We were. I said I was going to do this in order, and then I decided to change my mind, and now I just wonder if we need to go back to the order. Because it makes more sense that way. So let's do another one. Let's look at another one, that's First Declension. And we won't do all the translations or explanations on it. And I'm going to abbreviate nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative. There's nothing holy about this order, except that it's the one he uses in the book the whole time. So it makes sense that way. But the order of this order is arbitrary. There's nothing saying that order matters. That's not the most important and not the least important or anything like that. So let's take another Latin word, and we'll do silva silvae, which means forest. And if you remember, if you sing the song, you go, I, ah, and there's a line over here, I, is, as, is. So if you have a word like silva, silvae, and you know what the endings are, and you do a little math, and you take the whole thing and subtract the ending, and end up with your stem. Right? So if we subtract the ending from silva, silvae, what's our stem? Silva, yeah. So there's our stem. So now we got most of our chart filled out. The V, what looks like a V to us, in Latin gets a W sound. There is no W. There's no double V in your Latin alphabet. You get it's a W. It's our. So do you remember the famous line, Veni Vidi Vici, which sounds really cool because it sounds so Italian, tough. In the classical Latin, it was probably Veni Vidi Vici. Vici. Anyway, yeah, so you get Silwa, Silwai. We haven't been going into pronunciation at the moment, but that's just one thing that you keep in mind. The V is a W, Silwai. All right, so our nominative singular would get which ending? And you can look over here. A. Or you can sing your song. Want to sing our song again? Da, 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 da. All right, and then I, these, us, these. Nice. So we just declined forest. We were able to determine what its stem was, and then we just filled in all the blanks. Nominative subject. Here's our possessive. Indirect object. Direct object. Object of the preposition. Okay, so here's why when you make a timeline, when you do a note card, if you're doing your vocabulary cards at home, you always put those two cases on the card. Not just the nominative by itself, but always with the genitive. Because like I told you, we have 5 families. The third family is kind of the black sheep of the family. He just won't behave. His nominative. Okay, sing me the third declension nominative song. Third declension. I'm not nominative. No. Various is E-M-A. Various is E-M-A. Various is. Okay. Various is not a Latin ending. Various is an English word which means it varies. So even though it's called your endings, it's actually the English word various. There is no standard. They're all over the place. It's not that they're not all over the place. There are patterns that repeat, but there are so many patterns that if you were just to put the nominative for any of the nouns, you might not know if it was a third declension noun or not. And so you give the nominative and the genitive singular when you're talking about which noun it is you're talking about, because without the genitive, that could be some weird third declension thing that you just might not know it yet, but you wouldn't know how to decline it. So instead, we do nominative and genitive because, remember in the third declension somewhere, various is, that is ending is standard for third declension, and so it locks it down. So if various is, so therefore whenever you make your timeline cards, or even when your children are memorizing these verbs for vocabulary review or something, nominative and genitive, nominative and genitive. Otherwise, there's not really any way to know if that nominative is third declension or not, because it's really various. It's all over the place. So that's why we do nominative and genitive on a note card or any vocabulary review. Because as you see that's the first declension. But then if you see Lucas, the X doesn't tell you third declension because nominative, singular don't all end with X, even though Luke's does. But Lucas ends with IS, which all of the third declension genitive singular will end with the IS, so that locks it down for you. So that's why whenever I write a noun up here, I write it up with nominative and genitive. So the forest, of the forest, to or for the forest, the forest, or a forest, and then by or with from the forest. Good, good, good. And then over here would be the forests, of the forests, to or for the forests. That's so much fun. The forests, and by or with from the forests. Nice. Good, good, good. All right, so that's first declension. All those endings you did all the way through foundations, that's where they go. Now they have a home. Right at the end of all these first declension words. Good, 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 good. I really want to do some translations. This doesn't feel like I just keep doing words. So we kind of did that page. How many of you do have your purple book with you? How many people am I dealing with that are actually... okay, so it's not... the next thing he gives you are rules for gender. We're walking through this book. I'm just going to stick with the book instead of getting all creative and wacky and getting lost. He talks about gender. So did any of you take Spanish or French in high school? Or even German? German has gender. Right? The nouns, you also had to learn whether it was masculine or feminine or neuter. Same thing in Latin. The nouns have a gender, which is different than biology as far as gender goes. But there's a link to it. And it doesn't always seem to line up, right? Why would that be masculine? Everybody has hands. So why would hand be either masculine or feminine? In Latin, because we were in an age before the women's lib movement, there were jobs that were masculine jobs. And like sailor was one of them. There weren't any women in the Navy. So if you have nauta, nautai, which is the word for sailor, it's a masculine noun because it was only a man that they would have been referring to in their culture. Caesar is masculine. There weren't any girl Caesars. Okay? And so one of the rules is that if it's naming a male person, like Caesar, because that's a person, then it's a masculine noun. If it's naming a female person, if you have the word for queen, that's a girl. so it's a feminine. So there's some rules that are still just based on whether it's referring to a guy or whether it's directly referring to a female, a male or female kind of thing. Otherwise, it follows a pattern with your declensions. I told you there were 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. First declension, what we're dealing with here, first declension nouns are feminine for their gender unless it refers to a male job. So like nauta, nautai is a first declension, so the A and the AE. So that's a masculine noun because it refers to a job that a guy would have had back then. But the nouns otherwise are feminine nouns. Land is a feminine noun. Forest is a feminine noun because it's not a guy's job and it's in the first declension. Second declension are masculine unless it refers to something that would only be a female. Same rule applies. It's just the families have some general titles within them. So your second declension nouns are masculine. If you wonder why this matters, it matters when you get to adjectives because you have to match the gender of your adjective with your noun. And you can't do that unless you know the gender of your noun. So eventually it gets real important. It won't feel important at all today. But once you get to lesson 6, which is pretty early in the book, you get some adjectives. And you got to realize, whoa, if I don't know the gender of this noun, I don't know how to decline the adjective that goes with it because it'll get either a masculine or a feminine. Or a neuter ending. So there are some neuter second declension nouns, which we may get to today and we may not. They're actually declined differently though, so it's pretty clear. And just like third declension is wont to be, there's not a real pattern in third declension. Just by knowing it's third declension doesn't tell you the gender, so you've got to learn them as you go. But then fourth are mostly masculine, and fifth are mostly feminine. So the way I remember it is like, it kind of looks like the line of a football team, right? Like where you've got the tackles and the linebackers, I don't know the order, and you go into the center, right? But if you go, you've got right tackle and left tackle. Or what else do you have? I don't know all the names. Right guard or left guard. And they're the same distance from the center when they line up, right? So that's kind of what it reminds me of. You've got your center here. He's his own thing. There's no right or left center. There's just the center. Or what do you call him? You don't call him center. No. Center. Is that right? Okay. So you've got your center. But then you go out to your right and your left tackle. And then if you go further out, you get to whatever's out there. So as you start at center and move your way out, you get two masculine. They match. It's symmetrical. And then they go out again and you get your feminine. So that was what finally locked it in for me. I had nothing telling me how to organize this until the football thing got brought up. Yes, Sam?
It's actually a masculine and
Right, but it doesn't change its spelling. It's still spelled the same way. Like nauta, nautai, right? It's still A-A-E or I. Just like the feminine ones are I. But the reason I put the neuter here is because when you get to second declension, they're mostly masculine. But you know it's neutered because even though it's second declension, it has some different endings. So the spelling tells you. So that's why I put that one down because it's spelled differently. Are there any questions on gender? That's a common question in our society right now. Lots of questions on gender. And all these are in your blue book, and grammar numbers 32 and 33. So as you get into this, that's not all the information that you get on gender. It'll reference you to the grammar, and then you've got the rules laid out much more clearly probably than I just tried to say them out loud to you. Okay, and then he gives you some verbs. He doesn't teach you how to conjugate them yet, but he gives you some to work with because it's hard to write a sentence without a verb. And he wants to get into some sentence translation, which I'm really itching to do too. So we need some verbs. So we're going to learn some stuff about verbs now, even though I told you it was nouns. So you've been lied to. I'm lied to. All right, so I didn't take French, but I did take Spanish in high school. And this is where Latin and Spanish are similar again. Which makes sense, right? Because Spanish is a romantic. It's in the romantic family. Romantic, like Roman, not like lovey-dovey. The lovey-dovey languages. But so Spanish and French and Portuguese, Italian, and Romanian are all of our still continuing romantic languages. They're all really, really close to Latin in a lot of ways because they're direct children, whereas English is some odd thing going on. But like, so I'll get into Spanish. So you're like when you were doing your Spanish verbs, did you Spanish and French? Who took either Spanish or French? A lot of us. You didn't always need a pronoun, did you? You could, like for let's go, it was like vámonos was let's go. You could just say vámonos. You didn't have to put a pronoun with it. The word itself meant, here we go. The we was included. We went through our pronouns a minute ago. Those pronouns were included in the verb form. And that's the same in Latin. You don't have to have a pronoun. It's implied by your verb forms. So that's very similar to Spanish. I think that's similar to French. If some of y'all have French. So even though we're not going to get into verbs really, really in detail, let's move into them enough here so that we can use them well. What are some of the verb songs that you learned in Foundations? Oh, there you go. Okay, that's English. I want your Latin song. Y'all did good. Your Latin song, so we learned OST, mustus, and what were those called? Oh, you learned principal tense? What did you call it?
Conjugation,
Present tense. And that, say it again for me.
conjugation, present.
I'm not clear. It. I said it. Don't you know what I mean by it? OST. Mustus int. All right. So just like the noun endings are giving us information, as the letter gives us information, this letter gives us information in Latin. It tells us that I am a verb and I am a present tense, first person, singular verb. The O tells us all that. I am a present tense, first person, singular verb. This tells us that I am a present tense, second person, singular verb, etc., etc. So since we know with that S that it's a second person verb, what's our pronoun for second person singular? You. Right? So I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they. We already previewed that, right? We, y'all, they. So if you see the S on the end of the verb, you know that it's second person. It's a second person singular verb. And that S always tells you that with all your verbs. Like what Jamie's doing in there with them right now, you're learning a whole bunch of details about verbs. But when you get to the end of a second person singular verb, it's going to have an F on it, all by its one V. And that's going to tell you second person singular. So if you see that, you don't need the word you at the beginning of the sentence. It tells you can put you with it. So all this is to say you don't have to learn your pronouns right now. Because if you learn your endings, and you see a MUS on the end of your verb, then you know that it's third person singular. You can say we at the beginning of that sentence, even though there's no pronoun in that sentence for we. it'll just translate because it's contained, the meaning is contained in those last three letters. Right? So that's the first part of that. All right, so I showed you nauta and nautai. We didn't decline it, but you remember what that means? Sailor. Right, nauta, nautai. But I still haven't given you any verbs. All right, so we're going to look at some verbs. Oro, oris, orit, oramus, oratus, orant. So you still see the same order, right? First, second, third person, singular, plural. Okay, I feel like I'm running 1,000 miles an hour. Is anybody just spinning? Your head is just spinning. Like, you guys have already had that. Your head is just spinning. Is there a question that could be answered that might help just settle things? Have you taken a deep breath lately?
Ask us what verb you're working on.
We're almost there. I have a second word. I'm eating it. I used to work at McDonald's when I was in college. We'd have these buses come in, right? Like 4 tour buses, and there's 600 people in the lobby. Rebecca flipping burgers and flipping burgers. And then Rico, I don't know his last name, but he was Puerto Rican. And he was about that tall. And Rico came around the corner. He said, stop, 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 stop! Everybody breathe. Okay, back to work. And he was gone. It was like there was something about it. Feels good. Yes?
Where does the A come from and the second person singular?
Good question. It's a fantastic question. Our verbs all have a letter that goes with them for the conjugations. There are 4 conjugations, 4 families of the way verbs are conjugated in Latin, and they each have a letter, a vowel, that tells you which conjugation it is. And it comes before one of the endings. So the stem, this is to pray, or to beg, which is interesting to me that those go together. It's also where we get our word like for oration. To make an oration, which we would call that like a public speaking gig. We don't think highly of prayers that are orations. Jesus seemed to talk against those. But somehow it was still, like it's still the same stem, to beg or to pray. Because oftentimes you would go before a court and make an oration, or you'd go before the legislature and make an oration, or you'd go before the king and make an oration. And so why did you go before those 3? Because you needed something. You needed to be found not guilty. You needed the law passed, or whatever you need from the king. So it was still to beg, to make that request. So to beg or to pray, I haven't forgotten your question. To beg or to pray, that's our translation for this. And for so we got 4 conjugations of verb, and they're just called first, second, third, and fourth. And the letter, the vowel that goes with first conjugation is A. And so it gets put in between your stem, which is OR, and your ending, your final personal ending here that tells you which person it is. It goes in between there, and it's another clue as to which conjugation verb you're dealing with. So your fourth is I. These are both E, but one of them has a macron, and I can never remember which one. Oh, I haven't told you about macrons yet. The straight line over the vowels are called macrons or macrons. I've never heard a Roman person say it, so I don't know how to pronounce it. To the macron or macron, it's another teaching tool. Caesar did not write using macrons. The ancient texts, there are no macrons, but as they developed ways to teach Latin, they invented the macron. So it basically does the same thing that it does in English. It tells you that it's a long vowel. It's the clue that it's a long vowel instead of a short vowel in your pronunciation. I need to look this up so I'm not leading you guys astray. I can never keep track of which. Okay, so its second conjugation gets the long E. Yeah! Knew that. Yes?
You conjugated the verb, but is there an infinitive?
Spanish?
There is.
What is that too?
It is, okay, so it goes with your principal parts, and you get, okay. So while we're doing verbs, we talked about how to make your noun cards. You always have nominative and genitive on it, so that you know which declension you're in. You always do your verb cards with the 4 principal parts on there. Every verb vocab card should have 4 words on it. If you know those 4 words for that verb, you can conjugate into any tense, mood. It gets so you memorize all 4 at once. One of them is the infinitive. So if I were to make my note card for this, on the back it would say to pray, right? The back would say to pray. But the front would say oro, orare, oravi, oratus. And those are, each one of those gets you all the stems that you need to conjugate that into the gajillion different ways that you can conjugate a verb. This one is the infinitive. The second principal part is your infinitive, like we have in English. So you do learn it when you're learning your verbs, because if you do your vocab cards effectively, you have all 4 principal parts on the front of that.
Where do all those endings come from?
Where-
Up there, right?
What's that now? All these endings?
That means you have RA, IW, that's not part of OSD.
No, it's because remember how you said that this first conjugation,
Present tense.
present tense.
So what are those?
This is only dealing with the present tense. It's all contained here. You just give your first person singular present tense is what you give first.
Okay?
Then you give your infinitive.
And you just memorize that
That's what it is. And you just always do them in the same order. And this is your something else.
So is there some kind of list of those?
Yeah, there is. If you have your blue books with you, you go to page 41. This one is called perfect indicative active. So now that you know, it doesn't really help, does it?
Oh, that explains.
It's good information. But what it is that when you get to the perfect tense, right? That's a tense indicator. The perfect tense, and then an indicative mood. The ora with the V becomes your stem. So if you don't know this, then when you try to conjugate anything in the perfect indicative, you won't put a V with it, and it won't mean what you're hoping it means. So this gets you the stem. And then the oratus is perfect participle passive. There's probably no need in writing it on the board. But it's another verb form that needs that construction to mean what it means. But if you know those 4, then you have all of your stems for all of your verbs. And there's a lot of different ways to do a verb. So even though it seems like a really busy vocab card,
With the note card, you should have, for all the verbs, you should have 4 different.
the 4 principal parts on the front. And when the kids say it to you, they need to say oro, orare, oravi, oravis. And the back is to pray, okay? Yay.
What is the difference between conjugation and tense?
Conjugation and tense?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So tense is just one of the things you know about a verb. Like you can think about it. Do you know what person the verb is? First, second, or third? Do you know what number a verb is? Singular or plural? Do you know what tense the verb is? Present, past, future, future perfect, present perfect. So tense is just one of the things you know about a verb. Or you could say it the other way. One of the things that a verb is communicating to you. Tense is time, right? Is it happening? Did it happen before? Or will it happen? So tense is time. What did you compare it with? Conjugation. Conjugation is where you work through first person singular, second person singular, third person singular, first person plural, second person plural, third person plural. To conjugate a verb is to do this right here.
So give it to us in English. Like love, like I love,
Oh, yeah,
you
there you
love, he loves.
Good,
That's
yeah, I
fine,
love.
right?
You do it. You're doing better than me.
Okay, but then
We love.
this other stuff, tense would be today I love, yesterday I love,
Good.
tomorrow I will love.
Good. Yeah, there's
So
tense.
that's
So
different.
there's an example of tense.
Okay.
Right. But you can conjugate in future tense.
Right.
I will love, you will love, he, she, it will love, we will love, y'all will love, they will love.
That's true, yeah.
So the tense tells you the time has happened. The conjugation runs through all the possibilities for person and number. Does that help at all? Yeah, I don't think you will help.
What does it say up there when you have, I know, or then you have infinitive, and you got perfect?
And you're at perfect.
Yeah, perfect, indicative, active, which is not helpful.
He didn't think we did.
It'll be helpful later.
And what forms of the word did you write under? I'm sorry, I can't read it.
I can't either. What's your question?
Just read me what you wrote in the square.
Oro,
Right.
which is this right here. First person singular, present tense. Orare,
Right, just the
which is
infinitive.
the infinitive. Oravi, O-R-A-V-I, but it sounds like a W. Orawi, perfect, indicative, active, and oratus, O-R-A-T-U-S, oratus. Perfect participle passive. See, this is not helpful. But if you erase all that, now we know what the infinitive is, which was the question I was answering. And you know that your verb note cards all get 4 words on them, and that's probably all we need to do right now with that. Yes.
I don't think you ever answered her question, or maybe we didn't hear it, about where the A for the S comes from in Oros.
Oh yeah, okay. So this is the answer to that question.
So they just can't have like 3 consonants next to each other.
No, that's not it. First conjugation takes this A after the stem. So this tells you that the word is about prey.
Right.
This letter, the letter A, tells you that it's a first conjugation verb. And then your final personal ending tells you the person and the number. O-S-T, must, tis, and.
So you just leave it off the first one?
Yeah, it's just the way it works. There's no way at the end of it. It ends with an O, and there's no way before it. You don't say ora o. You might for a different word, but you don't say it for to pray or for I pray. And you'll find that your first person singulars are the ones that will have the most oddities about it. This is the way it goes.
So if we're gonna stick that extra A in there, then
Uh-huh.
why don't we just say, oh, ox,
Because what you
I know this one.
okay, so when they say first conjugation, present tense, you could have done it with that. Because that would still fit first conjugation. What you're actually learning when you sing that song are called the final personal signs. So the way the CC song is titled, first conjugation, you could put the A in there and it not matter. But what they're actually teaching you are these final personal signs, and those are the same for all the conjugations.
The second conjugation still has OST, but it has
Yes.
something else in front of it.
But it has a different letter in front of it.
Yes.
Third conjugation still has OST, must descend, it has a different letter in front of it. Because based on the way the CC Talk song is titled, you're exactly right. You can put the A with it and it'll be consistent. But what they're actually teaching you are the final personal signs, which apply to all the conjugations. It's a naming thing that got confusing there, what CC called it. It's really less than that. It's just the endings. OST, must descend. All right, so we did all this just so we could throw some verbs up.
So what's the second? Like, do a second.
Huh? I'm sorry, what's the question?
Show us the second conjugation verb so we can see the difference.
Right. You have an E with a major line.
Okie dokie, but I'm gonna have a cheat sheet. Okay, real quick, and then we're gonna get back into nouns. All right, so there's a verb for to advise. To warn or to advise. And this is something you get used to in Henley Latin, is they're giving you all these words so that you can read Caesar's Gallic Wars. Like to warn is not a common word that we need around the house, generally, to warn or to advise. But then we do like to cook or to vacuum or to paint or to drive, but no. Caesar needed advice, so we get advise. And if we were to put it on our note card, we would put moneo. And this is the maker one. No. moneo, monere, monoi, monetus. So there's our four principal parts, just to stay consistent with what we did. And we're going to decline it. All right, is this part clear to everybody? When I slap that up there, that we're doing number and person, is that cool? First person, second person, third person? Yes.
You said now we're going to decline it. Do you mean conjugate it?
No, it's convenient. It's conjugated.
Okay.
Conjugated. Conjugated. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so it looks like this. Moneo. I'm going to try to keep the macrons there just because they... Mones. Monet, but I don't think Monet gets it. Nope. Monemus. Monetis. Moment, and I don't think that gets it either. Nope. So so we can compare, except that I erased it already. No, there it is. So we can compare. We can see our OST mustis ent. OST mustis ent. We've got a letter before our ending. Now we've got our E in there. Moneo, mones, monet, monemos, monetis, monent. Now let's put
That's
that.
all that's changed, is you took the A out and put in the E.
Because it's everybody.
Because it's everything.
Top one changed.
Now we need a third and fourth.
Not right now. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. So if we know that that's our final personal sign, and we know that that's our vowel for that tense, then we can subtract all that and we can know our stem. Right? So now we got the MON is our stem, and it carries the meaning of to advise. So I advise, you advise, he, she, it advises, we advise, y'all advise, they advise.
So does each word only have one conjugation? Like every verb is either first or second or third conjugation, or can it be?
Nope, it just goes in one family. Yeah. There are four families, but they only go in one.
Always.
But always, they don't share. No, only in one. But then your question about tenses. But like every single one of those verbs is then conjugated into all of the possible tenses, but it never changes conjugation. Yeah, good. So there's the distinction, maybe. That's cool. That's good. Something else stood out about verbs. Just a second. Oh, another thing about Latin verbs, that except for the to be verb, right? What's the to be verb? Yeah. So except for that verb in Latin, verbs always go at the end. Always go at the end of the sentence, except for the verb to be. It's lively and spry, and it can bounce around and be wherever it wants in the sentence. That's what you get for being the to be verb. But unless you're the to be verb, you're on the last word of the sentence, which is pretty handy when it comes to translating and you're trying to figure out what in the world's going on. It gives you a place to start. So let's put a sentence up and translate it. Because now you all know nouns and now you all know verbs. So now you're experts. Oh. So we will back up to something that we learned. Our first Latin sentence. This is it. This is all we need for sentence. What was that?
Sailor phrase.
The sailor craze. What told you that?
Now I mean sailor.
Sailor.
Or eyes.
I knew or something like pray.
Mm-hmm.
Third
And then you just sailors.
Korak
So why did it change?
So that's the sailors.
sailors pray. Like, so what happens, right? We're singular third person. Because it's not I, it's not you, only one other option.
Kind of like you're saying, he prays.
Yeah, there's no, it's just the sailor. So this is where it's handy to know that the verb comes last, unless it's a to be verb. Because you're looking at those words, and like, what? I don't even know any of those words. But the last one is a verb. You haven't learned the to be verb yet. There's none of them in your sentences. That's your verb. So now you know, what do you know about the sentence because that's your verb? Like, well, the ending for audit, there's only one person with just the T at the end. There's only one number with just the T at the end. So that's a third person singular verb. So you know your subject isn't I, and you know your subject isn't you. You have nauta. What do we know about nauta with an A on the end? It's the nominative. That's the only ending with it. Remember our because that gets a make wrong. I, is, us, is. So if those are your endings, and we see nauta with no macron, the only possibility is that it's nominative. Nominative subject. It's the only job nominative does, right? Nominative subject. So we know that this is our subject, and that's our verb. We know that this is nominative. And we know that it's singular, right? This was the same thing, singular and plural. Yeah. So we know that it's nominative singular. So it's translated singular sailor, singular verb form, praise, the sailor praise. What was the first verb that we did? Oh, we did land. Let's pretend like the land praise. So how would we do that? There's our root, there's our stem for land. Put our A on the end. Hurrah. So the land praise, the same process for singular. Singular verb ending, third person singular verb ending. We look out here, is it I or you? No, it can't be. It has to be third person. Terra is the land, so the land praise. We get over here, and we've got the AE and the NT, nautai orant. We look at our verb at the end. It's a great place for us beginners to start. We say NT, our final personal sign. So yeah, so like going back to the question, the better label up here is final personal sign. That's the information those letters are giving us. Final personal sign is NT, which only goes with third person plural. They, do we need a they? We don't need a they because we have I took down my conjugation. My declension. No, here it is. Right, nominative plural is the AE. So we've got our subject, the sailors pray.
So if we said we pray, would we need anything to the word we?
Nope.
Just say
Oramos. Could be we pray. Eventually you learn the pronoun for we. There is a pronoun for we, but to simplify where you start in the language, you don't need to learn it. Let's do one where we assume a pronoun though. Let's say that these sailors are pagan and they pray to the land. These sailors. So let's say that they're plural. Nautai. Orant, we've got that. The sailors pray. Here I go leaving the book and confusing myself. Let's do something else besides this sentence. I'm going to go back and see what's next in the book. I know. All right, another thing that they teach you. Next thing they learn yet is the word non. And it's an adverb that means not. And they give that to you so you can have some negative sentences as well as some positive sentences. And it comes before the verb. So if we wanted to say that the sailor does not pray, it would look like that. The sailor does not pray. Good. They give you two other verbs that I want to give you so that we can do some other translations better. They give you another verb in the third person, singular and plural. Weedet, V-I-D-E-T, and vident, V-I-D-E-N-T, except you say weedet and weedent. And if you look at the V-I-D-E, does anyone know what that one means? To see. Right? You got your vocab, Liz. So weedent and weedent. They don't ask you to conjugate it, right? We're not to conjugation yet in the book. We are here because y'all are inquisitive. But they just give you some third-person verb forms, and you just translate it directly. Orant means he prays. Orant means they pray. Weedent means he, she, or it sees. Weedent means they see. Yeah, good, 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 good. So now we can do that sentence I was wanting to do. Let's translate this one. I don't know if I can read that. Can you see it okay? Can you see the letters? Nauta terum vidit. Weeded. We just got weeded. The sailor. Sailor, and in English, the verb comes next, so you just translate it where the verb goes. The sailor sees who or what? The sailor sees the land. But did you need to ask that question? And I've erased all my important stuff. So let's put the terum back up there for those of you who don't remember. So it's terra, arum, as, is. And what are our cases? Nominative, dative, accusative, direct object. Ablative, object of the preposition. The sailors, so nauta terum, read it. We see an M on the end of that noun. We've seen the T-E-R-R before. Like I know that word, that means land. I wonder what job it's doing in the sentence. Here's our 5 jobs that we know. Which one has an M on the end? Thankfully, only one that looks like that. So we look across, we're like, this must be a singular noun being used in the accusative case, and it's accusative direct object. So by the M, this is what I mean by the single letters conveying meaning. That M on the end tells us that that's a singular direct object of that sentence. And that, I don't know what I can say always because it's a language, but as much as I've learned in Latin, that word is the singular direct object of a sentence. There's not another possibility for that word. So we have a subject, we have a verb, and it matches, right? If you know, like if you were to see something like this, be like, what do I do with that? I have a plural verb and I have no plural nouns. You know, so you would know that that wouldn't go with it. This is not a real sentence, so I wouldn't know what to do with it. But that's where the verb comes in, right? Where that ending tells you, I need to be looking for a singular noun. because, or a plural noun, there's an N in that ending. I've got to have a plural subject somewhere. So it's giving you that information. But this is telling you accusative direct object. This is telling you nominative. That's telling you singular third person. So if you know your stems, you know what that means, sailor, and that means land, and that means to sea, then the translation of that sentence, there's only one possibility on this one, and it's that the sailor sees the land. About that one. Terai nautos vident. So are we going to have a plural or a singular subject? Plural subject. Is this plural? IR is as is, IR is as is. It's on the plural side, so that's plural. Is this plural? You might think, I don't know, I see it in 3 places, for crying out loud. And this is where coherence and context makes all the difference in the world. Is that you are not just translating, you are interpreting. And so if you only have those 3 words, and you don't have any other options, it's got to be the subject. Sometimes you'll get into this and you'll see other options, and you'll have to think, how does this make sense with the context that I'm in? The Latinists wouldn't have to ask that question, because they keep the context in their mind just like we do when we read English. And it's not some weird Latin thing. We keep context in our mind. We just can't do that yet in Latin. We have to dissect it all. But looking at this sentence, you see that there's one viable possibility for this to be a subject, and that it would be a plural subject. So go with your gut. Say, the lands see the, is it one sailor or more than one sailor? More than one sailor. So the lands see the sailors. And what told you that it was more than one? AS, because when you look up here at your chart, there's only one AS. It's on the plural side, and it's also accusative. So we know that it would be receiving. It would be receiving the action of what the subject is doing, even though lands don't have eyes. This is the only words we got right now. So the lands see the sailors. And then look how it's different, right? This is the sailor sees the land. The meaning that's conveyed by those words being in that order with those endings is that the sailor sees the land. Here's all the same stems, all the same words, but the endings are different, right? So they convey different meanings. So you know that that's not a direct object anymore. Even though I has different places, direct object is not one of them.
Do the subject always go first, or can they be linked?
No, they don't always go first, but you'll find them near the beginning, like we do it. We have conventions in the way we do our syntax, even though we don't always have to do it that way.
So you could say now that
You could, and it would only convey that meaning, but you probably won't find it that way. They have conventions like we do. Just like we might introduce a sentence with a dependent clause. You know, while I was walking across the bridge, I saw the land. They'll still have while I was walking across the bridge at the beginning, and you'll get the subject next type of thing. So they still have common. Oh yeah, that's what I want to do. Here's another common arrangement. Have I given you enough nouns yet to do another one? Let's learn another noun.
Can you do one that has, I'm thinking it's like, the sailors pray for the land, because for the land would have an AE, and sailors would also have an AE. So how do you know which ones, if it was written, how would you figure out if the lands pray for the sailors, or the land, or sailors pray for the land? Obviously, but
Right, and
which one's the subject and which one's the direct object?
right, it would be context, and it would be coherence.
Okay.
Even though we did this, which is incoherent.
Right. But they would both end
You're right.
with E, right?
They would both end with the AE. And so another thing that's crazy is that we're learning these exercise sentences that are out of context. Even when you go through the exercise and you have all these sentences in order, there's no context. But we don't write sentences that way. We don't speak sentences out of the blue. Right? We say something that follows something else. So as Caesar writes his Gallic Wars, everything follows something else, and so your meaning is carried through that context as well. Because you're exactly right. You don't have a clue there just by the endings. So she constructed a sentence that had a plural noun and a singular dative form. And say, how would I know which it was? If it was nautai, orant, terai. By itself, you wouldn't. Except the word order there, you might say, nautai, terai. And there are word order conventions. But then I don't do it that way. Oh, I anglicized it. See, y'all are good though. You just passed your quiz. Good job. Did you pass one earlier? Gold star. Yep. So context. Who said context is king? Who was that Bible study lady? Kay Arthur. Context is king. All right, what do you want to learn next? Oh, ice cream is created. All right, so let's learn another noun.
Are we done a sentence with the non in it?
With a noun,
Like a negative?
I think I gave you one example. Can we do another one? All right, so let's do another noun. Let's practice. All right, we've got Victoria, Victoriae. I wonder what that means. Yeah, victory. Victory. So if that is our, this is the first, we're only doing first declension right now. So that's our nominative, Victoria. This is our genitive, because we know that's how we make our note cards. Victoriae. What is our stem? We subtract the ending, and we get victory, or victory, as the case may be. Go down here, put all our stems in, which is a longer stem than normal. All right, now we just sing our song. I sing the songs in class all the time. Sing the first declension. East, west, east. East, west, east. East, west, east. Sing. All right, so let's read them out loud. Victoria, Victoriae, Victoriae, Victoriam, Victoria, Victoriae, Victoriatum, Victoriis. That one took me a while. Victoriis, short I, long I, a. Victoriis, I'm sorry, e. Victoriis, Victorias, Victoriis. Victoriis. That's a fun one. I called Abe when I first went through this. I was like, I've got two eyes next to each other. What do I do? I just pronounce them both. That was easy. Victoriis. Okay, let's do another one. Oh, we learned Mary very early in this one. Maria, Mariae. If the author of this book is Robert J. Henley, and if you were to meet him and address him formally, you wouldn't say Mr. Henley, you would say Father Robert. So he's a Roman Catholic priest, and he was a Latin teacher at a Roman Catholic parochial school. And so this is a very Roman Catholic book. So you learn Mary very soon. Not that Protestants don't have Mary. The esteem and the commonality of mention isn't as high. So we get Mary very early on. It's you learn several things about the Mass through here. You get several prayers that, as Protestants, I think we pray at our house. But that's who wrote the book. He's a Roman Catholic priest. So we get married very, very early in it. Oh. So let's decline Mary.
Is that M-A-R-I?
M-A-R-I-A. And I guess the A should have a micro. Is that right? No. Not unless it's added.
M-A-R-I-A-E?
Yes. Maria Mariae. Ooh. So it would be Mary, of Mary, or possessive Marys, to or for Mary, Mary, if she's the direct object receiving the action, or Maria, if she is the object of a preposition. And I guess you could have more than one Mary in the room. So we got two Marys. Mariae, Mariarum, Mariis. There's another double I there. Marias. Mariis. So the plural doesn't happen much in this book because usually the Mary that he's talking about is the Mary. We usually get it over here on the singular side. But it will decline because you can have more than one Mary in the room. So Maria, Mariae, Mariae, Mariam, Maria. We may be ready to do some longer translations now. What are you doing? Taking notes or something?
Yes.
All right, so this is one of the common ones in the book that you will get in the dative. So here's an example of the AE and the context of the sentence telling us how we're going to use the AE. All right, so we have nauta. We've gotten used to seeing that one. Our singular nominative ending. We've got our T out here, which is the third person singular, present tense. So the sailors pray. And then if we have Mariae, is it of the Mary? The sailors of Mary pray. The sailor of Mary prays. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Although it could be of the Mary, right? But the sailors pray to Mary. Then you get your dative being used here for the to or for. So the translation here, we have the sailors. Nope, the sailor, singular. Nobody caught me on that one. The sailor prays to Mary.
They're not prepositional phrases.
They're not prepositional phrases. No, they are in English. But they are, it's kind of funny, they are dative. They are dative. Sometimes referring to them as indirect object feels weird too, right? Because in English, do you ever have an indirect object without a direct object? We don't in English. We would have a prepositional phrase. So the what do prepositions do? Anybody know the definition of preposition? So a preposition relates a noun or pronoun to another word. So in English, our English word to is relating Mary back to pray. It's creating a relationship between this verb and this noun. It's the object of a preposition, but in Latin it takes the dative case. So this is dative, which oftentimes is the same as our indirect object. But sometimes in English it just feels more like a prepositional phrase. It's relating Mary to the verb to pray. So another little nuance, but to think of it as an indirect object is the right idea. That's what it is. It's a to or for. We just happen to use a preposition in English to accomplish that. All right, let's do this one. the box right here. Maria Silvas Guide. Oh, you got the plural on there. So what's our verb? Read it. What does it mean? What's the meaning? See. Is it singular or plural? Singular. What would it need in the ending to be plural? It would need an N right there. It would need to be we den to be plural. But it doesn't have the N, so it's singular. So it's third person singular. Third person singular. We have our forest here with an ending. There's our endings for first declension over there. It's accusative plural. So that's only a plural ending. And we have a singular noun. If we're just trying to figure out what the subject is, there's no way that that's the subject. If we can recognize that it's plural and we have a singular noun, those don't go together. Subject verb has to agree. So okay, so that's not the subject. Let's go back here. Singular third person subject. We've got Maria. There's only one chance for here. Nominative singular. Singular. Nominative subject. So Mary. Mary's the one doing the seeing. Seeing. We just narrowed it down out of our three possible words. Mary sees. What is she seeing? The forest. One forest or more than one forest? More than one forest. So we're in plural, accusative. Oh, it had a circle. So the os is telling us the job. Who or what is Mary seeing? Mary is seeing the forests, but it's also telling us whether it's singular or plural. So the stem tells us what it is. The ending tells us whether it's singular or plural, and the job it's doing. Mary sees the forests. Okay, let's do this. Nautai, Mariam, non vident. Got a couple of nouns. Got our adverb. There's our verb. What does our ending tell us on this one? I got our NT. Did I erase all my verb endings now? Yeah, NT, OST, mustus ent. Third person plural. We're looking for a plural noun for our subject. A plural third person can't be I or you. Mariam. Mariam is singular. She's also accusative. So accusatives aren't subjects. Back up. Nautai, our AE, which could be several things, but one of the things it certainly can be is a plural subject. We have a plural verb, so we found our subject. And like all these steps we're going through, right? Maybe even by the end of the day, you just look at the beginning of the sentence to see if it fits, right? We're walking through the whole logic of finding it, but once you get doing your exercises in here, you'd be like, I bet the first word of the sentence is the subject, and like 99% of the time at this point you'll be right. But this is the logic that these endings allow you to perform, to get to it. So we got the sailors. How do I know it's plural? The AE. If it was just the sailor, it wouldn't have an E on it. So it must be the sailors. What are the sailors doing? Are they seeing? The sailors are not seeing. The sailors Okay, so this is interesting. How could you say that a different way in English besides the sailors are not seeing? The sailors do not see. Both of those are present tense. Both of those are legitimate translations of this word. The sailors do not see.
Mary.
The sailors are not seeing.
Sailors do not see Mary.
Right. And just as legitimate is the sailors are not seeing. Or in the Shakespearean, the sailors see not. Which, if your students writing that down, praise them for it. Don't get it wrong. It's awesome. The sailors do not see Mary. So think about Yoda now. The sailors, Mary, do not see.
Mary.
So Yoda speaks a Latinized English. Because the verb goes at the end, right? That's how Yoda talks. Yoda talks with the verb at the end. That's just the writers knowing their classical history. It's a Yoda speak. So the sailors do not see Mary, the sailors are not seeing Mary. Okay, we'll take a break. Me too, I forgot about those. Until now. What time is it?
If you have 22 more minutes.
22 more minutes for the whole day?